Welcome to Feminine Power Time. Turn off the chatter and tune in to what matters. This is Arylo, your host, and today I welcome you to episode number 91, Feminine Wisdom for Changing Times. Thresholds. How do you make the transition that you are in right now, whatever it is, from a place of fierce grace? Meaning, how do you go through whatever transition is happening for you in a way that is graceful and not destructful, a way that is stretching you but not stressing you, a way in which you're making wise choices, not operating out of blind faith, a way from a fierceness perspective that you're showing up, that you're activating that fire within you, and you're not withholding, you're not settling, you're not playing small, you are stepping forward to whatever it is that your heart and soul is calling you forward to right now. And for you, this might be showing up in your career. It might be showing up in manifesting in your business, or whatever it is that you do to express yourself and also create a living for yourself. It may be showing up in your relationships that are changing, relationships that are ending, relationships that need to change and are catalyzing you. And if you don't show up and actually be with it, it's going to burn you up. It might be showing up in your health where, you're burned out, you're overstretched, you're overwhelmed, you're self-sacrificing, and your body is letting you know. Could also be showing up in your money. Money shows up just like the body, where it's like you don't have enough, and no matter how much you're making, it's not enough. These are all what we call catalysts, or what I call catalysts. And as I was thinking about all of you today, and I've actually been thinking about talking to you all about this for a couple weeks, but I've been I've been in my own transformation right now. I just finished I think it actually felt like it started when I went to Egypt a couple months ago at the end of February, right after my birthday, and that parlayed into getting ready for the first Feminine Leadership Elevate retreat, which just happened last weekend, which was amazing. And also signing and going through the book contract thing. You all know I've been working on my book proposal, Overwhelmed and Over It, for a year and a half. And if you're new here, welcome, if you don't know that. And I finally had the Elevate Feminine Leadership Retreat, which was a dream seed for 4 years. And then I signed the book contract just a couple days ago. So I'll be starting to write Overwhelmed and Over It, and more on that, because I'm going to bring you all along with me as I write this book for you and for all of us women who are experiencing way too much stress on our hearts, in our bodies, in our minds, in our psyches. And so I've been thinking about this conversation we're going to have today, which is making transitions from a place of fierce grace, which when I define feminine power, if I was asked to define it, I would define it in 2 words: fierce grace. And so we're going to dive into some questions that I think are really important to be asking yourself, whatever transition you're going through. And if you're not going through a transition right now, I'm going to invite you to wake up, wake up and shake it up, because this is what's going on right now in the world. And if you got your head stuck in the sand, which I imagine if you're here, you don't, to really use this conversation we're going to have today to open yourself up to really look at what might be calling you. And if you already know that you're in a transition and you're stressing or you're stretching or some combination of both, bring that with you. So we're going to dive into some of the pieces that I really feel like that I'm not sure you know these different parts of wisdom. And even if you do know them, honestly, while sometimes I listen often to my podcasts and I'm like, oh my God, like I really needed to know that. So here's the deal. I have my, oh wow. So I have my cup of coffee poured in my Do All Things with Love mug. I have lit the candle, a red candle that is in a candle holder that my dear friend Shasta Nelson gave me when I was moving away, to let me know that we would stay connected. So I felt that it has a big C on it. So for connection and love for all of us today. And then my oh wow is literally, as I was just saying that to you all, a bald eagle flew over the Puget Sound, which I'm looking out at my window right now, and just perched on this wood thing that's in the sound right in front of me. And the eagle is so much about soaring. And I think about the eagle. We'll talk about the eagle. We'll talk about the phoenix today, because whatever transition you're going through, you can choose to do it with grace and fierceness, or you can stick your head in the sand and avoid it, and it's a lot more struggle and suffering. Or you can just kind of aimlessly move along and not have that fierceness, or think you have to do it all on your own and not have the grace. And again, it will exhaust you, and we'll be wandering around in the desert for 40 years. And we actually need you to get through this transition, not as quickly as possible, but with swiftness. And so that's what we're going to dive into today. And just a couple announcements for you all coming up this summer, just so you know. Number one, actually, I am going to be opening up in the new moon cycle some one-on-one mentorship spots for people who are really ready to harmonize on the inside and are going through a transition and a transformation and could use some one-on-one support so that you can go through it in a place from fierce grace and then rise into whatever's calling you forward. And so you can learn more about that at harmonizeandrise.com. Also coming up at June will be the flow ritual, focus your life force on what matters. And so we'll be opening up Feminine Wisdom Way for people who want to join at the half-year point, and also doing the mid-year Power Pause ritual, which will be happening in June as well. So keep an eye out for that. And if you are not on my wisdom letter list, make sure to go to Arylo, ARYLO.com, and sign up so that when these things happen, you know about them. But of course, come here, because this is where I always come and tell you all about all of that stuff. And if you do want to know more about Feminine Wisdom Way, you can just go to femininewisdomway.com. So those are some of the things that are coming up that I felt like I could really do to support each one of you in whatever transition you're going through. So you got your coffee? Okay, you might not have your coffee, but let me take a sip of mine. And I'm going to start us off with a poem, actually, by one of my, I call him my spiritual boyfriend. He's he's a member of my Disembodied Mystics Club, which are the amazing mystics who are no longer in form that I feel like I have a relationship with. And I read their books, and I kind of like talk to them, and I feel like they give me guidance. No, I don't hold seances, but definitely I feel like I'm in relationship with them. And I want to start us off with this poem. It's not really a poem, it's more of a writing by John O'Donohue, who was a Celtic mystic, former priest, left the priesthood, became just an amazing author, very prolific, consulted companies all over the world, sat with people all over the world, and just is an amazing being. And I'm going to do this so that we can really dedicate this session here, you, me, and everyone else that's tuned in, to whatever transition you're going through. And we're going to slow it down, because that's what we do. Take a breath to access our feminine power and our feminine wisdom. So if you can close your eyes and listen to this as a way to get into this conversation, do. And to bring whatever transition you're going through, whatever change is calling you with you. And if you can't close your eyes, that's okay. Just take a deep breath and do what we like to call expanding time and space, and just take this into your heart. So here we go. Thresholds by John O'Donohue. The beauty of nature insists on taking its time. Everything is prepared. Nothing is rushed. The rhythm of emergence is a gradual, slow beat, always inching its way forward. Change remains faithful to itself until the new unfolds in the full confidence of true arrival. Because nothing is abrupt, the beginning of spring nearly always catches us unaware. It is there before we see it, and then we can look nowhere without seeing it. Change arrives in nature when time has ripened. There are no dragged transitions or crude discontinuities. This accounts for the sureness which with one season succeeds another. It is though they were moving forward in a rhythm set from within a continuum. To change is one of the great dreams of every heart. To change the limitations, the sameness, the banality, or the pain. So often we look back on patterns of behavior, the kinds of decisions we make repeatedly, and that have failed to serve us well. And we aim for a new and more successful path or way of living. So often we opt to continue the old pattern rather than risking the danger of difference. We are also often surprised by change that seems to arrive out of nowhere. We find ourselves crossing some new threshold we had never anticipated. Like spring secretly at work within the heart of winter, below the surface of our lives, huge changes are in fermentation. We never suspect a thing. Then, when the grip of some long, enduring winter mentality begins to loosen, we find ourselves vulnerable to a flourish of possibility, and we are suddenly negotiating the challenge of a threshold. At any time, you can ask yourself, at which threshold am I now standing? What am I leaving? What is preventing me from crossing my next threshold? What gift would enable me to do it? A threshold is not a simple boundary. It is a frontier that divides two different territories, rhythms, and atmospheres. It is wise in your own life to be able to recognize and acknowledge the key thresholds, to take your time, to feel all the varieties of presence that accrue there, to listen inward with complete attention until you hear the inner voice calling you forward. The time has come to cross. And so, beloved, now there are two bald eagles sitting on this box outside my front window. And I feel like it's you and I, and perhaps John O'Donohue. Maybe he's the second eagle, and you and I are the first. But a good sign that we have grace here with us. And I think of the eagle, wow, like it really does embody fierce grace, doesn't it? And so as we slow down here and presence this word threshold. So you've heard the word transition. I'm going through a transition. I'm going through a change. I'm going through a job transition. I want to make a job transition. I'm going through a relationship transition. I'm going through, a challenge in my health or in my money. And those are all fine words, but part of my dealio in this world is to be here to help elevate our consciousness and our experience and our reality out of the mainstream crazy that is no longer serving most of us, and certainly not the planet, to a new level of consciousness. And so we do that through words. Words and language are a big part of that. And so I invite you to take this word threshold into your vocabulary, into your being, into your knowingness, into how you view your life. And the first part of feminine wisdom for really meeting change from a place of fierce grace is that you need to name and claim the threshold that you're standing at, or that you are already walking through. If you don't name and claim it and say, actually, this is the threshold that I'm walking through. This is the threshold that I am standing at. I'm standing at the threshold of realizing the work that I've been doing for the past 10 years, while amazing, is no longer the work that I'm meant to do moving forward. I'm moving through a threshold right now of ending a marriage or ending a relationship. I'm moving through a threshold that is all about me integrating and bringing back parts of myself. I've been so focused in my corporate career that I lost my creative self. And so I'm going through a threshold of integrating my full self. I mean, these are all different kinds of thresholds. And I love what John says here, where he says that a threshold is not a simple boundary. It is a frontier that divides two different territories, rhythms, and atmospheres. And that really explains feminine leadership, or what I call elevated leadership. That you're in a process, this threshold, this transition, whatever this catalyst is for you, is an invitation to elevate your reality, to live, like I call it, in a different zip code. So, it's interesting for me, for example, I'll share an elevation for myself and a threshold for myself. And so you all know, or if you don't know, that you're new here, for over a decade, I dedicated my life in the public world to self-love and to writing 3 self-love books and to teaching self-love in all kinds of different forms all over the world, and to making self-love accessible and articulate in a way that people, instead of being like, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself, self-love is not a meme. It actually is a deep soul journey. And so that's what I spent 10 years doing, actually defining self-love, making it accessible, and creating what became a school, which is really what the focus was for the last 2 to 3 years, which was what the universe said, Christine, take all of the work that you've spent the last 10 years downloading and creating and putting into form and put it into a school so that it can thrive without you. This was my job. Just as normal as the last job that I had when I worked at Gap, and I was the director of leadership communications and communications for the global organization from a human resource perspective. And I knew at that point that I was being called to my next assignment, which at that point was about leaving my corporate career. Or this time with the path of self-love was about creating an organization that could survive and thrive without me having to run it, so that I could really step into and deliver this feminine leadership and women's empowerment work that I've been doing for a long time, but not as much in a public way. And so these 3 books that are coming out, the Feminine Leadership Retreat, the Feminine Leadership Coaching, and the 10-month Fierce Grace Feminine Leadership Immersion and Intensive that will be coming up this fall. I needed to be able to complete one thing in order to start the next. But it's not like in the feminine, we don't hard stop and then hard start. It's a transition. And it takes space and time, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But if I didn't know and I didn't claim I'm in this threshold, I'm going from the queen of self-love, the person who's out in the world teaching self-love, to the person who's teaching the teachers and creating a social impact organization that can thrive on a day-to-day basis without me, to the place over here, the threshold, to speak like I've never spoken before, to drop the veil. See, up until now, unless you're here on my podcast or you're doing something with me in a more closed circle, I don't speak plainly around what I really know and what I really see that brings my MBA, my mystic self together. So part of my threshold is I know that now is the time for that MBA mystic to come together and speak like she's never spoken before, to be an advocate for changing this world so that we can live in a sustainable way and stop this crazy consumerism greed machine that's going out. That's the threshold I'm stepping through. And if I don't name it and I don't claim it and you don't name it and claim it, I have some dear friends who are going through the ending of a marriage and a partnership, and they have children together, and she's needing to do things at a sovereign level now. And so this threshold of sovereignty and buying a house on her own and making decisions on her own and realizing that she's going to be in some ways a single parent on a day-to-day basis is her threshold of her returning to her sovereignty. But if she doesn't name it, she's just in the I'm separating from my partner and I'm trying to buy a house and I'm trying to figure out blah de blah, right? And it's like, that is so uninspiring. And it's all about the tactics, not about the deeper energy that's moving through you. Same thing with a career. I've been talking to so many women who are in their jobs or in their businesses, and they know that they're being called to make a shift. And so if they claim it versus I'm going to look for a new job, or I want to figure out what I want to do, or I'm going to go try this new venture and start this business, versus I am being called to step into my leadership in a new way, in an elevated way, in an expanded way, and to give my gifts in this world in the way that's my part to do, in the way that truly matters to me. And I'm going to allow myself to walk through this threshold so that I can find the form that's going to align with who I am on the inside and not just be another job or another business or another project. Totally different energy, totally different place of power within you. So you can go about whatever transition you're in from your head or from a tactical level or a base level consciousness. I'm going to get a new job. I'm going through a divorce. I'm making a change in my career. Notice my voice is, do y'all like that voice? It's kind of cracking me up right now. I called never mind. I'm cracking myself up. Let me take a sip of my coffee. I know it's kind of getting intense around here. The 2 eagles are still sitting there. We got to lighten it up a little bit too, and laugh while we're going through this, or we're all gonna burn up because the intensity of the chain is gonna be too hot. So, or you can open up and name and claim it as a threshold where you're going to a different territory. It's a frontier that divides where you've been and where you're going. It divides the territories and the rhythms and the atmospheres that you will live in. And so just think about that it's like a frontier. You have to cross that frontier. It's not a hard stop and a hard start. It's not a here I am 1 minute, I press a button and now everything is different. It literally is like if you were going to be a pioneer and go out and like you were in Kansas and you're going to go to the West Coast. It's a frontier that you're crossing. I think a lot about, sometimes I'll talk about how when I'm going through these thresholds, which we do every year, this is why, and we do it also in kind of cycles of every 3 to 5 years, depending on how your natural rhythm is, and bigger shifts, which is why I love to have this conversation every time in the springtime, because it's a natural threshold time. You have Easter, you have Passover, you have Beltane, which is also called May Day. These are all times about transition and elevation and threshold changing. And no matter when you're listening to this, this will still apply because we're living in a time where we're always constantly shifting. But I bring this wisdom forth at this time because it's most potent to have this conversation right now, which is when we're taping it, even though you might be listening to it later. And so this is also part of how we live the feminine wisdom way, is we notice what's going on in the natural world. And you can also notice what's going on in the spiritual world and see how, well, God, is that interesting? There's Easters, 2 of them, and Passover and Beltane. They all kind of happen at the same time. What might that be? Right? That's a sign that there's superpower. So that's why we're having this conversation right now. So my inquiry before we go any farther, which is what we're going to go into next, is how do you then make this transition, this threshold shift with grace, is name it. Name and claim the threshold that you're crossing, the frontier that is dividing your territories, your rhythms, and your atmospheres. I always think of it like I am when I'm going through one of these, I'm moving to a new zip code, but it's a new zip code in consciousness. So when I moved, for example, from the Bay Area up to Seattle, to be able to follow my guidance to write these next 3 books and bring this feminine leadership work into the world, into form, I said I felt like, even though I did move zip codes on the physical plane, that I also felt like I moved zip codes in consciousness. And that is what happens. You elevate. You elevate. So what, love, is the transition that you're going through, the threshold you're crossing? And I invite you to just name it and claim it. And you're like, and if you know it right away, awesome. And just feel the difference between coming at it from your mind or like a base level consciousness and entering into a relationship with it from an elevated perspective where you're like, oh, this is a threshold that I'm crossing. Shifting on both the physical, material realm and the mystical, spiritual realm. And I'll be in relationship and engagement with it. And if you don't know, that's okay. Take the inquiry. Remember, in the feminine wisdom way, it's not about having the answer. It's about having the right inquiry to open up your consciousness, to open up your awareness, to open up insight that you can't see from your mental mind, that allows you to open up the portals into the imaginal field, the infinite intelligence, the intuitive realms that the scientists and the spiritual sages from Einstein to the yogis have talked about forever. Just human man who, made the rational mind king over everything and discounted these other realms that scientists and spiritual sages know are true and that we know are true in our hearts as women. So take that inquiry. An inquiry is one of our most superpowered tools we use in the feminine wisdom way because it opens up possibility that we can't see. And so take that inquiry, and I like to say you chew on it. And like you would chew on a piece of gum, and take the inquiry of like, what is the threshold I'm standing at? Or what is the threshold that I am crossing through? What is this transition, and what's the frontier I'm crossing? And journal on it. Bring it into your morning practice. Take a walk on it. Now it's in your consciousness. I have given it to you. Take it like a little tic-tac, stick it in your purse, and bring it with you. Okay, so y'all, at least we're open, or kind of where you're at. And one of the ways to notice that what the threshold is notice where stress is at, or stretch is at, or struggle is at. That's usually an indication that something is calling you. Or notice where you have a longing, or you see other things in people and you compare yourself to that. Those are also signs that of where your transition and your threshold is calling you. All right, so let's move over to the second part of our conversation today is, okay, so we're naming and we're claiming our thresholds. We know it's powerful. We know it's not just about stop, start. We know that it's this frontier crossing. We know it's about elevating our consciousness. We know it's about shifting things on the physical plane. How do you do this from a place of fierce grace? And we're going to start with grace. And this is why I love that the eagle came to be with us today. Because Here's the thing, two things I want to share with you. Number one, that I'm going to talk about the phoenix, and then we're going to talk about the eagle together. So the phoenix is a great it's not an animal totem because it's not really I mean, it is an animal, but it's a mystical bird that I also really believe does exist on the mystical plane, and its physical counterpart is the peacock. And here's the short story of the phoenix. The phoenix, every 1,500 years or so, she decides to burn down her nest, to burn down her home, to burn down the tree in which she's been living in and built this real comfortable life. And she chooses to burn it down and fly through the fire to and the reason is because she wants to release, and she's come to a point where she can't grow any farther, or there's things that once really served her that are now binding her or sabotaging her or holding her back. And so she knows she needs to release those things in order to soar and rise to her next expression in the world. And so she burns down this house and she flies through the fire. So imagine this phoenix, and it's all these different colors and the rainbow, and it's like amazing, fierce, and it's flying through the fire. And it flies through this fire to release what's called the dross, Dross, or the nigredo. These are like words you might have heard, probably not. I never heard them until I started studying the feminine mysteries. But basically what it is, it's the heavy stuff, the stuff that no longer serves you. So it could be relationships, it could be emotions, it could be roles, it could be responsibilities. It was one of the amazing rituals we did at the Feminine Leadership Elevate Retreat, is we did a whole ritual around releasing the roles and responsibilities and robes that no longer served us and would hold us back from rising. And I think that's something we should all do every year. I know I do it every year, and it's so powerful. And so she comes to the other side, the phoenix, and she comes up through the ashes. So you've heard the phoenix rises through the ashes, and she's standing on the ashes. Ooh, 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 hot, 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 hot. And that's the moment when there's still some bones that are left in there, and you take those bones with you, and you're a couple little tail feathers, and you take those with you because you want to take them with, but the dross has burned off. And from there, you can rise. And the phoenix, what's great is that she always retains her wisdom. As she goes through these cycles, she always retains her wisdom. And then she creates a new home. Now, there's a lot of value in the phoenix because it gives you that firepower, that catalyzing fire. I myself totally relate to the phoenix. I have recreated my life again and again and again and flow through that fire. A lot of women I work with happen to be what I call phoenix women. They relate to that. They're not here to sit on the couch and eat potato chips or stay in the same job for 25 years. They're here to make change, and they're here to be the change, and they know that they have to shift. And they don't always know that. I mean, some of them get stuck. A lot of times as Phoenix women, what happens is we get stuck in jobs or relationships or lifestyles that bind us up and hold us down. And the thing about being a Phoenix woman is that if you are binded or try to be caged into something, you will die. Maybe not physically, but sometimes, but emotionally and spiritually. You cannot, as a phoenix, be like stuck in a cage. And so part of our role for ourselves is to go through these processes to release that which is no longer serving us. Now, the challenge with the phoenix part is if all you do is burn it up and burn it up and burn it up, which is the fierceness part, which we're going to end with. But if you don't have the grace part, think of the dove. And there's a great poem, I think it's by Shakespeare, don't quote me on that, about the phoenix and the dove who marry each other. And when I learned about this, because as a phoenix woman, what I would do is I would burn things up and then go on to the next, and burn things up and go on to the next. And I see this a lot with women. They think, oh, I have to like burn that thing down, whether it's a relationship or it's a job or it's whatever. And then they just start from scratch again, and they start from scratch again. Or they move too fast. I was just talking to a beloved who has had a really, really amazing career, and in the beauty industry. And we were talking about how she's being called to really, instead of focusing on the outside in beauty, to focusing on the inside. And we had this great conversation because she was asking me about like, how do you make that transition in grace? And what I said is that you don't want to move from a place of blind faith where you're just like, okay, I'm being called by spirit, and so I'm going to take this leap of faith, and you don't have any foundation underneath you. And you don't have the physical foundation, you don't have the systemic foundation, you don't have the inner core foundation, you don't have the financial foundation, and then all of a sudden you don't have the support you're needing, and you're stressing yourself out and stretching and draining yourself, and you're going to be like a dead phoenix on the floor versus one who has what she needs. And there's this way that fire, that desire to be the change, right? And so for her, as this being who wants to go into the world and really help people, what I said to her is, I said, when you're making a change, and this is for all of you, all of us, whether it doesn't matter what your job is or what your mission is or what your purpose is that you want to give yourself space and time to make the transition, to step over the threshold, to step through the threshold. So again, we don't stop and start. So from a strictly like practical perspective, what that looks like from a monetary perspective, so say you're a person who has 100% of their income coming from one thing, and there's something else you're being called to do that is like zero, you're making zero money from. You don't go from 100 to zero. So that could be, shifting a job, or it could be starting a business. What happens is over time, you go to 80-20, and you kind of figure out in your current role, whatever that is, whether you're an entrepreneur or you work for somebody else, how you can give like 80% of your time and energy, which would still be amazing, and receive the same amount of money from them and create 20% to focus on the new. And then over time, what happens is you kind of move to a 50-50 ratio, and then a 20-80 ratio, and that's when you move. That's when you make the shift. That's grace holding you through. Or if you're a person who has a job that is like fine, it's no big sweat, and I bet you could probably do it in 80% of the time, and something else is calling you and it pays you really well, the grace is use that money to fund being the threshold crossing. I call it the transition job. And be grateful. And then remember, we don't work for dollars for hours. We work for value exchange in the feminine power way. And so I'm always like, you can give 75% of your energy, take the money and be grateful for it, and then use that other 25% of time to really deepen in your spiritual path, deepen in your own self-awareness path, get deeper inside of yourself so that you can, when you make the shift, do it from a place of centeredness in your core and be grateful for the transition job. And I kind of learned this the hard way, because when I was transitioning and I was getting my corporate, when not the Gap job, but at Blue Cross Blue Shield, when I worked there while getting my MBA, it was like I was getting my MBA, I was going through a divorce, and I was basically having my spiritual awakening. And this job was so easy. I could do it in 50% of the time. And I would always be lamenting, why don't they see me? Why don't they see me? Why don't they want more from me? And Noah looked at me and he said, Christine, this is a gift. Stop your lamenting, go in, work your 50%, do the exchange, and then use that space for all this other stuff, because you can't change everything at the same time. So it's called the no sweat job, or the transition job. Or for you, it's a relationship, or it's health. Like, you don't just be like, wake up one day and like, honey, we're getting divorced. See you later, right? Or if it's your health, it's like whatever is happening in your physical body, it's going to take time to make that transition, because as it turns out, the physical body is the last place that the disease shows up. And as my acupuncturist said, it's going to take, for as many months as it took to get you here, it's going to take that many months to get you back. And that's okay. It's a threshold crossing. And so grace is allowing there to be space in that and knowing that the change is coming. Another woman that I work with she came to one of my Vision Quest retreats in 2013, and we were doing we often do fires, these releasal ceremonies, and she stated, my marriage is over. It's 2013, in front of all these women, and we all witnessed her. And it's now 2019, and she went home from that, and she did dissolve the marriage as it existed. She didn't get divorced, though. And they actually worked to try to reshift the relationship. And they made a lot of progress in a lot of different ways. And also, it was imminent that that relationship as a partnership was going to need to complete. And so this year, they have been moving towards sovereignty financially and also and emotionally. And they've had the space to do that. And this year, they'll be moving into separate houses. And so that's the grace part. And I think that there's just so much pressure because either you have this deep heart desire to create something in the world, or you know your heart wants something different. And I don't mean slow down and be stagnant and like drag your feet and be what I call a meeker. Meekers and eekers are those people who are like, oh, I'm going to make a little change here. And oh, I'm going to make a little change here. No, like you got to be present and you got to be working it and working through it and doing the work with yourself on the inside. This is the fierceness coming out. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. It is the inner work is the hardest work to do, but it's also the most rewarding work to do. And it's only hard because you got to be deeply honest with yourself and you're going through, but that's where the juice is. That's where it's all at. And if I could just like impart anything to all of us right now is like, we need to stop looking on the outside for the answers of like, oh, if I just know this, or I just do that, or if someone tells me the answer, it's going to be there. No, honey, love, darling, sister, phoenix, wise woman, the answers are inside of you. And here we go into the fierceness. The fierce feminine comes through every time. And it's like, the thing is like, this is for you. You have to stand for yourself. That this transition matters, that this threshold matters to you because you have something deep in your heart and deep in your soul that is like, I stand for myself. This must come into being and I will fight for myself. Not in the like, I'm going to punch you out, rage against the machine, Joan of Arc, die on your sword kind of way. But there is a fierceness that is required for you in order to move through this threshold. I mean, think about it from a pioneer perspective. If you were walking through Kansas or walking through Nebraska, and you hit the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, you would be like, if you've ever done that, like I know, like when I drove into Wyoming and all of a sudden I looked up, it was totally flat. I looked up, there was a crazy mountain there, or driving through Oregon and as in my car looking at the wagon wheel trails, like I would have like, that would have been hard. I might have turned around because they had to drive in buggies over rocks. And they didn't have, Whole Foods to go to. They had to, but you're a pioneer yourself. More of a spiritual pioneer, an emotional pioneer, because we don't have those same physical challenges like that, which means we have so much more potential. You have so much more potential to elevate faster, quicker, in a way that also is supportive of you. But you got to show up for it. And I see a lot of people dance with the fire. They're like, oh, I want change. Oh, I want transformation. Oh, I want transition. But no, they don't really want it. They want just a little better. Just a little better so I can stop the suffering. But they're not willing to go the distance to fly through that fire. And I'll tell you, as a phoenix, if you go into that fire and you don't have the container and the support to help bring you through that, you can get stuck. And if you try to turn around, you're going to come back and you're going to be like a bird who has like half her feathers burned off, and it's not going to be pretty. Now, this doesn't have to be painful. In fact, it can be joyful. It can be expansive. But if you don't name and claim your threshold, if you don't invite grace to be with you, and grace is the divine. There is an amazing spiritual teaching that says, make no move before grace goes before you. I read that from Joel Goldsmith he's also one of my mystical boyfriends or mystical friends. Make no move before grace goes before you. The dove must fly with the phoenix, the water and the fire together. So you don't burn up. You don't move too fast. You don't cut off what you need financially and emotionally and physically and materially to make this transition at a spiritual level and a presence level. But you also are going to have to show up fierce, because what I will tell you is the people in your life and your old habits and your old patterns and even the parts of you that are scared will show up and try to sabotage you, distract you, fragment your energy, keep you focused on anything but what you're here to do. It'll rob you from the space. It will keep you from having the space. So for me, for example, this Elevate Feminine Leadership Retreat that I just did, that is part of me bringing what is next onto the planet in form for me to have something that says, I am here, X marks the spot, this exists on the physical realm. And I did have to fight at a level. I had to stand for myself. I had to be what we call the feminine leadership archetype of the advocate for myself and say, this matters to me. I'm going to invest money in it. I'm going to invest time in it. I'm going to create space for it, even though I have so many other things going on just to be in what I have already created. But this matters to me. My friend Arylo calls it yanking on the universe a little, tug, tug. And you don't want to have to reach into the universe and, yank hard, but a little tug, tug and a little, this matters to me. And I stand for myself. So what matters to you, love? And are you willing to say no to the roles, the responsibilities, the robes, the to-dos that don't serve you anymore, that are distracting you from stepping through this threshold? And are you willing to open yourself up, to have the support that you need to step through this threshold? Because going through a threshold crossing and a transition on your own, while it can be done, is not advised. I don't do it. I make sure that I have a circle of support around me, often multiple circles. It's partly why I created the Feminine Wisdom Way. So many women have used that structure and that sisterhood to make transitions in changes in their lives. It holds them through it. I have worked with personal mentors who, when I knew I was going through an elevation year, or I knew that I needed a deepening inside of my own self to be able to get into alignment, I would work with a mentor for a year. I would do an intensive with someone who I knew could hold space for me, that had walked the path already, that had gone through different initiations, that could be a reflector, a space holder, a catalyst, someone who'd help me see what I couldn't see and help me expand. And we don't get told that. We get told, go to school, go to college, get a degree, invest in all of that. We get told, okay, yes, go ahead and do professional development, blah, 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 and then have your company, pay for it and be more productive and all this stuff. And yeah, okay, that's all good. But we don't get told or even give ourselves permission to understand we need support, and there isn't a financial exchange, and there is an energetic exchange, and there's a time exchange. It's just part of it. And we all have our resistances to that. And so whatever resistances you may still have around that, I invite you to release them so that you can be supported in whatever transition you're going through, whatever threshold it is. And to consider, what is the support that I need as I go through this changing time? And that support can look like individual one-on-one support. It could look like a circle. It could look like an intensive week or weekend. Last year, I went to the I call it yogi camp, 1 week intensive on mind and meditation, Kundalini level 2, woo, kick your butt, crazy intensive. But it elevated me and helped me clear out my psychic field and helped give me tools that I'm still learning and embodying today, and that I will be sharing this fall with you. And that's what I do. And so I share that with you. You don't have to do it that way. It's your way. But whatever threshold you're crossing, make sure you have whatever level of support that you need. So let's just take a breath together. The eagle's still there. And I'm just going to pour some love on you here. I take a sip from my cup as we complete. I want to honor you, love, for your courage and your commitment to yourself, to the people that you love and care about, to whatever it is that you care about that is connected to this earth and humanity, to your passion, and to all the ways and to all the thresholds you've already crossed. I mean, just think about that for a minute. All the thresholds, all the Phoenix transformations that you've had, those are in you. They've strengthened you. They've created a resilience in you. They've created a deeper level of basic trust in you. And whatever is calling you right now, whatever change, shift, elevation, transition, transcendence, threshold, you're going to be okay. And it's going to be okay. And you don't have to run through it. You don't have to do it alone. You don't have to figure it out. You just have to keep showing up from your heart. Be with yourself on the inside. Open up and invite grace in, the divine spirit, whatever that is for you. Reach out and be held as you go through this. And allow yourself to savor it. It's not about rushing to the end. It's about enjoying the journey. It's already written. It's already here in your design. Can't mess it up unless you just don't show up. And know that you're here. I'm here with you. Like I said, I'm going through my own threshold shift, and all the women that were at the Elevate Feminine Leadership, them too. And pretty much every woman I work with and know, that's what we're doing right now. And so you can count on me to be here for Feminine Power Time. We're just completing our 3rd year, and I'm up for another year. In fact, a couple little things as we complete here. I've been talking about sending you all a survey like forever, and I just finally here at Beltane made it my project that I am going to be reaching out to you because it's going to be, the podcast is going to be Feminine Power Time, my project for my elevation project for June solstice through December solstice, which every June solstice at our flow ritual, we choose an elevation project to help have something to respond to that brings us into our elevation. So mine's going to be Feminine Power Time, and I can't wait to continue to make it better for you. And there's lots of great things happening, including how we can stay connected. I want you to be part of these 2 next books that I'm writing and get your feedback. And this is very exciting. I can't tell you yet. I'll be telling you more. But it's been seeded and it's in the works. And so I wanted to just say a couple things. Number one, for those of you who've been leaving reviews on iTunes, thank you times 1,000. You really, I've had some moments of does any of this matter? Does this make a difference? Is anyone out there? And you have kept me going. And so if you would leave, I just love hearing from you and what it is that you're loving and what you're finding valuable. And so my ask is to leave a review, to rate the podcast, leave a review, and then share this with other women. This is so that we can support people all over the world as much as possible. How you do that is if it's on your computer, you just go to iTunes, search for Feminine Power Time, and there'll be a little button that says listen to iTunes. And you hit that button and it will ask you to open up iTunes. You say yes. And then there will be a thing that comes up and it says ratings and reviews. You hit that, and that is where I'm doing it right now. That's where you leave a rating. I'm actually just looking here at the most recent one, Coach Najwa, I don't know exactly how to say it, who said, I found this podcast while searching for more feminine content. The podcast is an absolute breath of fresh feminine air. Thank you, love. Christine shares truly spiritual content about releasing, claiming, quieting, and being as a woman. I shared this with many of my friends and look forward to the episodes each week. So I'm reading these, and I would love more shares and more letting me know what's working for you and what you're loving. And if it's on your phone, on your app, you can just scroll down when you're listening to the podcast, and there will be a section there that says ratings and reviews, and you can do it right there from your phone as well on your podcast app. So thank you for all the love, and we are strengthening this sisterhood. Any brave men that are there, I really feel that. I feel like we're all connected together. And if I can be of support to you, whether it's through one-on-one mentoring, or it is through the Feminine Wisdom Way, or it is through any of the retreats that will be coming up in July at Kripalu, or the fall Fierce Grace Feminine Leadership Intensive, I'm here. This is my work, and I'm here to support the women that are really here to be part of the elevation of this planet and who have in their heart the power to change this world. And I know that you have that power within you. And so thank you so much for tuning in each week. I will continue to be here, and the eagle is still there. So from the Puget Sound, the eagle and I are signing off and sending you much, much love. And I will see you next week, loves. Okay, much love.